Hidden betrayal. The woman who discovered her husband's dark secret, criminal story. Sofia had always been the kind of woman who sought stability. It wasn't that she had a particularly thrilling or adventurous streak, but rather that she found contentment in the steady rhythm of life. And Ethan had been the perfect partner in that. When they first met in their late 20s, both were at pivotal moments in their lives, Sofia coming out of a long, difficult relationship and Ethan just starting to build what he called his empire in the business world. Their connection was immediate, comfortable, as if they had been destined to meet. Before we can continue, if you love crime stories, subscribe to this channel to help up creating amazing stories. Now, let's continue. They married 2 years later in a small but elegant ceremony. It wasn't extravagant. Sofia had never been one for lavish displays, but it was meaningful. There was something about Ethan that made her believe in the simplicity of love and in the promise of a future built on mutual respect. He was kind, patient, and attentive. He made her feel seen and cherished in ways she hadn't felt before. Over the years, as they moved from their first small apartment into a spacious suburban home, Sofia was content. They had 2 children, a son and a daughter, and every milestone, first steps, first words, birthdays, felt like proof that they were living the life they were meant to. It was a picture of suburban happiness that felt as real as it was comfortable. Ethan's success seemed to grow in tandem with their family. He started a small business in finance, working in consulting before transitioning to real estate investments. Over time, his business expanded, and with it, so did their lifestyle. They moved to a larger home in a quieter part of town, where the air smelled cleaner and the neighbors were friendly and well-to-do. They attended social gatherings, charity events, and dinner parties, always with a certain elegance that Sofia had grown used to. She would slip into designer dresses, her hair always impeccably styled, and would watch Ethan charm his clients with a smile that could win anyone over. There was an unspoken understanding between them. Sofia was the pillar of their home life, the mother who balanced her role as a wife and a caretaker, while Ethan was the provider, the one who kept everything afloat financially. Their life together, from the outside, was an image of perfection. They had everything they could want: a lovely home, a thriving business, and a family that appeared unbreakable. It was a life many envied, and Sofia often found herself taking a quiet pride in their success. She never questioned their good fortune. And why would she? Rawnted him now. There was no telling what would happen next. Ethan could try to talk his way out of it. He could deny everything, charm her with his silver tongue, and convince her that the documents were just a mistake. Or worse, he could turn the tables on her, accuse her of mistrust, and make her question whether she was just overreacting. What if she didn't have enough evidence? What if she had misinterpreted everything? But as much as she feared the unknown, Sofia knew there was no escaping it. Ethan's lies had forced her hand. She could not unsee what she had discovered. The reality of their life together had been shattered. And in its place, an uncomfortable truth loomed. Everything had been built on falsehoods. Sofia could not go back to pretending. She couldn't continue living in the world that Ethan had so carefully constructed around them. With a deep breath, Sofia stood up from the bed, her body moving of its own accord. She couldn't stay in this room any longer. She couldn't keep running away from the truth. It was time to face it, time to confront Ethan. She moved down the hallway toward the staircase, each step feeling heavier than the last. As she descended, the quiet sounds of Ethan's voice reached her ears. He was on the phone in the living room, his voice low and indistinct, but the sound of it made Sofia's stomach churn. She knew he had been hiding something from her, and the truth was more than she could bear. For so long, she had trusted him, believed in the life they had together. How could he have betrayed her like this? Sofia hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, her gaze fixed on the dimly lit living room. Ethan was sitting in his usual chair, his back to her as he spoke into the phone. The casual nature of his conversation contrasted sharply with the storm raging inside Sofia. She wanted to march over to him, rip the phone from his hand, and demand answers. But she was still paralyzed, still unsure how to confront him. How do you confront the man you've spent your life with? the man you trusted most, when you've discovered he has been living a completely different life behind your back. Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts, his tone soft but earnest. I promise, everything will be fine. I've got it under control. Just a few more things to sort out, and then we can move forward like we planned. There was something cold and businesslike in his tone, a sharpness that Sofia had never noticed before. It was a voice she didn't recognize. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. This wasn't the man she had married. This wasn't the man who used to come home exhausted from a hard day's work, desperate to relax and spend time with his family. This man on the phone now was a stranger, a man who had been playing her for years. Sofia's chest tightened, the weight of it almost unbearable. She took a deep breath, preparing herself for what was to come. She couldn't avoid it anymore. She couldn't keep pretending. Ethan hung up the phone a moment later, his eyes catching Sofia's as he turned to face her. His smile, that charming smile she had once loved, faltered when he saw the expression on her face. Hey, what's going on? He asked, his voice laced with concern, but Sofia could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted nervously. Sofia's heart pounded in her chest, the words she had been holding back now threatening to spill out. We need to talk, she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to sound composed. There was no going back now. She had to know the truth. Ethan's smile faded completely, replaced by a guarded expression. Sofia, what is this about? You're scaring me. What's wrong? She took a step forward, each movement deliberate. The storm inside her had reached a boiling point. I know what you've been doing, Ethan. I know about the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the money laundering, everything. I found the documents. Ethan's face went pale, and for a moment, he looked like he had been struck. His usual calm demeanor cracked, and for the first time in years, Sofia saw him falter. Sofia, he began, but she held up a hand, silencing him. I don't want to hear your lies anymore, she said, her voice stronger now, fueled by the anger and betrayal that coursed through her veins. How could you do this to me? To us? To our family? Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. His gaze fell to the floor, and for a long moment, he didn't speak. Finally, he looked up at her, and Sofia could see the desperation in his eyes. Sofia, please, he began, his voice softer now. I didn't want you to find out like this. I never wanted to hurt you. But you don't understand, this is all part of a bigger plan. It's not as bad as it looks. I've done things I'm not proud of, but I did it for us, for our future. Sofia shook her head, unable to contain her frustration. For us? Is that what you're going to say? You lied to me for years. You built this empire of lies and kept me in the dark while you got richer, while you did God knows what. And you're telling me it was for us. She laughed bitterly, the weight of his words settling on her chest like a stone. You've been living a completely different life, Ethan. And I've been so blind that I didn't see it. I did it for you, Sofia, Ethan repeated, his voice trembling now. You don't get it. I needed to keep this from you, because I didn't want to put you in danger. I didn't want to lose you. You're everything to me. But Sofia was no longer listening to his words. She had heard them all before, his excuses, his manipulations. He was the master of creating a story that always cast him as the hero. But Sofia had seen through the facade. The man who had been so careful to build a life with her was now a stranger. And no matter how many times he apologized or begged for her forgiveness, the truth had already taken root in her heart. I don't know who you are anymore, she said, her voice breaking as the reality of everything hit her. I don't know who I am with you anymore. Sofia turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there, speechless. The confrontation had begun, but the journey into the unknown was only just beginning. The confrontation had not gone as Sofia had imagined. The moment she had been building up to for days, her demand for the truth, had left her raw, shaken, and full of a terrible sense of finality. She had expected Ethan to try and deny it, to spin some sort of lie that would allow him to weasel his way out of the mess he had created. But what had surprised her was how deeply shaken he had seemed, how his usual calm facade had cracked revealing the desperation behind his eyes. In the moments following their exchange, Sofia found herself alone with the weight of everything she had just heard. The house felt unfamiliar now. Every corner of it, every piece of furniture, every photograph on the walls seemed to mock her, reminding her of the life she had once believed in. She stood in the living room, her fingers lightly brushing the surface of a family photo, the one of them all at the beach, laughing, with the kids playfully splashing in the waves. Ethan had his arm around her, a proud smile on his face, the kind of smile that now felt false. There was nothing left in this house to hold on to. Sofia had thought that the truth would set her free. She had imagined that once she confronted Ethan, the weight of the lies would lift, and she would be able to move forward with clarity, leaving the deceit behind. But instead, the truth had only shattered her sense of self. The more she tried to make sense of it all, the more she realized that she had been living in a dream, one that Ethan had constructed around her, and now that dream was gone. She wandered aimlessly through the house, each step feeling like a burden. The children were asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just broken. She had told herself she would protect them from the truth, from the chaos that was now taking over her life. But even that felt like another lie. How long could she keep up the charade? How long could she pretend everything was fine when she was slowly drowning in the weight of the betrayal? In the hours that followed the confrontation, Sofia tried to go about her evening as if things were normal. She made herself dinner, sitting at the table alone, mechanically cutting into her food. Her mind was a blur, lost in the fragments of everything she had just learned. Ethan's apologies had fallen flat. His words felt like empty promises now. And yet, part of her wanted to believe him. Part of her wanted to hold onto the image of the man she had married, the man who had once made her feel safe, cherished. But that man was gone. And so, the war within her began. The fight between what she wanted, peace, security, the life she had imagined, and what she needed, the truth, independence, the courage to face the reality of her situation, became a constant battle. In the days that followed, Sofia found herself alternating between moments of clarity and crippling confusion. There were times when the weight of everything would hit her all at once, and she would retreat to her room, burying herself under the covers as though she could hide from the truth. At other moments, when she could push the emotions aside, she would make a plan. She would gather her strength, summon the courage to stand up to Ethan, and tell him once and for all that she was leaving. But then the guilt would wash over her. The children, the house, their life. How could she walk away from all of that? Her body was exhausted, her mind drained. She hadn't slept well since the confrontation. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of Ethan's pleading face would haunt her, the sound of his voice still echoing in her head. And every time she tried to move forward, another obstacle seemed to appear, a new challenge to keep her tethered to the past, to the life they had built. Despite the turmoil inside her, Sofia continued to go through the motions. She dropped the children off at school, made phone calls, and attended to the mundane tasks of daily life. But it all felt like a performance, a mask she put on to hide the devastation beneath. She had become a woman in limbo, neither fully present in her own life, nor capable of breaking free. The truth had forced her into a new reality, one where the boundaries she had once trusted had dissolved. She couldn't trust Ethan anymore. But could she trust herself? Could she trust her own judgment, her instincts that had always led her to believe in him? The self-doubt crept in, and Sofia found herself questioning everything, her marriage, her choices, even her own perception of the truth. The confusion was unbearable at times. One evening, after a particularly long day, Sofia found herself staring at the stack of documents again, the very documents that had torn her world apart. She hadn't looked at them since the confrontation. In a way, she had hoped they would lose their significance, that they would somehow stop holding power over her. But now, as she picked them up again, she realized that they had become a symbol of something much deeper, a life of lies, a betrayal so profound that it felt as though it had stolen her very identity. Sofia sat down at the kitchen table, the documents in front of her. She looked at the rows of numbers, the offshore bank accounts, the names of people she didn't recognize. The intricacies of Ethan's business dealings had always been a mystery to her, something he had kept separate from their home life. But now, in the harsh light of day, she could see the enormity of it all. It wasn't just about money, it was about power, control, the ability to live a life without consequence, without fear of being caught. And Ethan had been living that life right under her nose, using her as a shield to keep his secrets hidden. Her anger flared once more. She had been the fool, the one who had allowed herself to be blinded by love and trust. But the truth was that she had allowed herself to be manipulated. Ethan had played her, and she had played along, complicit in her own ignorance. But that was over now. She could feel the shift inside her. It wasn't just about exposing Ethan for what he had done. It was about reclaiming herself, her voice, her strength, her dignity. The first step was confronting him again. She needed to make a decision, to take action. Sofia could feel the walls of her own indecision closing in on her. Every minute she spent in this limbo, every moment she spent questioning herself, was a moment wasted. She had to make a choice. Sofia stood up from the table, her mind clear for the first time in days. She would leave. It was not just the right thing to do, it was the only thing. She had spent too long accommodating Ethan's secrets, too long living in the shadow of his lies. She couldn't live like that anymore. The next morning, Sofia took the first step. She gathered a bag, packed her essentials, and left a note for Ethan. It was short, direct, and final. "I can't live this way anymore. I need space. I'm taking the kids and staying with my sister." As she drove away from their home, her heart pounded in her chest. But for the first time in days, Sofia felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't running away, she was stepping into the unknown, and for the first time, she was doing it on her own terms. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be many more struggles to come. But Sofia had learned something essential in the days since the confrontation. She had learned that the only way out was through, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Sofia had always imagined that walking away from Ethan would feel like the ultimate liberation. That the moment she left him behind, taking the children with her, she would be free. Free from the lies, the manipulations, the constant weight of distrust that had slowly poisoned their marriage. The house had never felt so suffocating, the walls closing in with every secret Ethan kept from her. The quiet escape to her sister's home had felt like a breath of fresh air, as though she could finally exhale after years of holding her breath in the dark. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sofia allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't trapped in the web of Ethan's deceit. She arrived at her sister Laura's house late that night, exhausted both physically and emotionally. The kids had been confused at first, asking questions about where Daddy was and why they were suddenly at Aunt Laura's instead of their own home. Sofia had done her best to calm their fears, promising them that everything would be fine. But deep down, Sofia knew that nothing would ever be the same again. She had taken the first step, but it felt like a small one in a long and uncertain journey. Laura was sympathetic but also cautious. Her sister had always been the more pragmatic of the two, the one who could see things from a clearer perspective when emotions were too clouded. "Sofia, I know you're hurt," she said, as they sat together on the couch in the dimly lit living room. "But you need to think this through. You need to have a plan. Leaving Ethan is just the beginning, not the end of this." Sofia had nodded, but deep down, she was already running the scenarios in her mind. The legal battles, the financial struggle, the public fallout. How would she navigate it all? What would it cost her to truly walk away from a marriage that had been so deeply entwined with her life for years? For now, she didn't have all the answers, but she felt something she hadn't felt in ages, a glimmer of hope. It wasn't the freedom she had imagined, but it was a start. The first few days at Laura's house passed in a blur of phone calls with attorneys, arranging daycare for the kids, and trying to make sense of the mountain of legal documents that had been gathering dust. The emotional weight of the separation, of what she had left behind, hadn't quite hit her yet. She was still too busy. too preoccupied with the logistics of this new life to stop and reflect on the enormity of the decision she had made. But eventually, reality began to creep in. The kids were adjusting, but their questions about Ethan kept coming. "When will we see Dad again?" they would ask, or "Why doesn't Daddy live with us anymore?" Their innocent inquiries were like knives to her heart. How could she explain to them that the man they called their father was not who they thought he was? How could she explain the reasons behind her decision to uproot their lives? They were too young to understand the complexities of adult betrayal, and Sofia wasn't ready to tell them the truth. As the days wore on, Sofia began to feel the weight of her own decision. She thought the hardest part would be the actual confrontation, the breaking of the ties, but now she realized that walking away wasn't the end of her pain. It was only the beginning. The silence at Laura's house was deafening, punctuated only by the distant sound of her children playing in the other room. Sofia had no place to go now, no clear path forward. The life she had built had been built on a lie, and now that lie was gone, leaving her with nothing but uncertainty. Her first visit to a family lawyer had been eye-opening. The legal realities of separation and divorce were more complicated than she had anticipated. Ethan's wealth, hidden behind layers of offshore accounts and business interests, meant that any attempt to divide their assets would be a long and drawn-out battle. Sofia had thought that walking away would be a clean break, but now she saw that it would take months, if not years, to untangle everything. Ethan had built an empire on deception, and now that empire was built on the backs of his family. The lawyer had asked Sofia the hardest question she had heard in a long time. "What do you want, Sofia? What is your ultimate goal in all of this?"
She had been taken aback. What did she want?
The answer should have been clear, but in that moment, she realized how little she truly knew about what she needed. The more she tried to answer the question, the more it felt like there was no real solution. Was it money? Was it revenge? Was it simply to escape the prison of lies that Ethan had built around her? In her mind, she had wanted freedom, a simple, unencumbered life where she could take care of herself and her children without the shadow of Ethan's deceit looming over them. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that her sense of freedom was an illusion. The children needed stability. She needed financial security. She had no job, no career outside of the life she had built with Ethan. She had been so dependent on him, on the lifestyle he provided, that the idea of living without his wealth and connections seemed impossible. Sofia's confidence in her decision began to falter. She had left Ethan, but she had not left the system he had built. She was still bound by the consequences of his actions, still tied to a life that she no longer wanted but could not entirely escape. One evening, as Sofia sat on the porch of Laura's house, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she felt the full weight of her situation. She had made a bold decision. She had broken free from Ethan. But what had she truly gained? In the solitude of the evening, the truth began to settle in. The victory she had envisioned, the freedom she had dreamed of, was more complicated than she had anticipated. She had left Ethan, but he had not left her. The emotional scars of their marriage, the betrayal, the lies, they were with her still, no matter how far she ran. And beyond that, there were practical realities that she had to face. The legal battle was just beginning. And in the meantime, she had no real means of support. As the days passed, the uncertainty grew. Sofia had been so focused on escaping the toxic relationship that she hadn't fully understood what awaited her on the other side. She thought the hardest part would be the confrontation, but now she realized that the hardest part was rebuilding her life, piece by piece, and learning to trust herself again. The fear of the unknown had been replaced by the fear of what was next. At night, when the house was quiet and the children were asleep, Sofia would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moments with Ethan in her mind. The calm way he had asked for her forgiveness, the way he had seemed so desperate to hold on to their life together, it all felt like a dream now. A dream that had shattered when she realized the truth about who he really was. She had believed in him, trusted him with her heart and her future. And now, she was left picking up the pieces. In some ways, Sofia felt as though she had been given a second chance. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that it was not a clean break. There was no real freedom without consequence, no new life without shadows. And despite her best efforts, Sofia could not escape the haunting feeling that she had lost more than she had gained. Ethan was still out there, still in her life, still controlling the narrative. His wealth, his power, his ability to manipulate the people around him, they were all things she had underestimated. He had always been a master of keeping secrets, of maintaining the illusion of control, and now that she had broken free from him, she realized how little she knew about the true scope of his reach. She had walked away, yes, but she had not yet won. What she had once thought was freedom was now revealed to be a false victory. And the real fight, the one for her independence, her sense of self-worth, and her future, was just beginning. As the days stretched into weeks, Sofia began to feel the weight of her decision. The image of herself walking out of Ethan's life, leaving behind the suffocating confines of their marriage, had once felt like the ultimate act of liberation. But now, sitting in her sister Laura's living room, staring at the clock on the wall as the minutes ticked away, Sofia realized how little she had truly gained. The kids were asleep upstairs, tucked into their beds after another long day of adjusting to their new life. They still didn't fully understand why things had changed, but they knew that their mother was no longer the same person. Sofia had tried her best to shield them from the worst of it, to keep up the facade of normalcy. But they had seen the tears in her eyes, the moments when she was lost in thought, staring out the window as if she could will her old life back. They sensed that something had been broken, and no matter how hard she tried to explain it, the cracks in her own heart were impossible to hide. Sofia had thought that by leaving Ethan, she was taking control of her life again. She had imagined that once the physical distance was between them, once the separation was official, everything would fall into place. She would heal, the children would adjust, and eventually, she would emerge stronger, wiser, and free of the lies that had held her captive for so long. But instead, she found herself staring into a chasm of uncertainty, a void of unanswered questions and unresolved pain. Every day felt like a battle. The phone calls with lawyers grew more frequent, more stressful. The legal battles over custody, property, and finances were more exhausting than she had ever anticipated. Sofia had never been involved in any of the financial decisions during her marriage. Ethan had always taken care of that. She had trusted him, and now that trust had been shattered, leaving her with nothing but a confusing array of accounts, documents, and assets that were almost impossible to understand. Ethan had hidden everything so carefully, and now, as Sofia tried to navigate the mess he had left behind, she felt like a stranger in her own life. And then there were the children. Despite her efforts to shield them from the gravity of the situation, they were suffering. They missed their father. They missed the life they had known, the family vacations, the weekends spent in the park, the simple routine of their everyday lives. Sofia could see the confusion in their eyes as they asked her when things would go back to normal. They couldn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming home, why everything had changed overnight. But Sofia couldn't explain it to them. She couldn't tell them the full truth, not yet. They were too young, too innocent. How could she explain that the man they adored had built his empire on lies, that the father they loved had been hiding a criminal life behind closed doors? She couldn't shatter their image of him, not yet. Instead, she forced herself to smile, to assure them that everything would be okay. But the weight of her own guilt was suffocating. Every day, she felt herself unraveling a little more. She had imagined that once she left Ethan, the pain would subside, that the anger, the betrayal, would fade. But it didn't. Instead, it settled deep into her bones, a constant ache that refused to go away. The moments when she thought she could finally breathe again, when she thought she could take control of her life, were interrupted by flashes of doubt, by memories of their life together. The life she had built with him, the life that now felt like a lie. In the quiet of the night, when the house was still, Sofia would replay the years they had spent together. She remembered the early days of their relationship, the way Ethan had swept her off her feet with his charm, his ambition, his promises of a perfect future. She had trusted him completely, had believed in the man he had shown her. But now, as the pieces of his deception fell into place, she realized that she had never truly known him at all. The man she had loved was a mirage, a carefully constructed persona designed to keep her in the dark. The realization hit her hard. She had spent years in a marriage built on manipulation, on lies, and on secrets. She had been so focused on the surface, on the beautiful house, the successful career, the perfect family, that she had missed the cracks in the foundation. She had ignored the signs, convinced herself that everything was fine, and now it felt like the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. And then there was Ethan himself. Despite everything he had done, despite the lies he had spun and the crimes he had committed, Sofia found herself unable to completely let go. She couldn't stop thinking about him, about the man he had been before everything had fallen apart. The anger she felt toward him was real, but it was mixed with something else.
Guilt. Sadness.
A deep sense of loss. She had loved him. She had loved him with every ounce of her being. And now, she had lost him, not just as a husband, but as a person. The idea of their family, their life, was slipping away like sand through her fingers. Every time she thought she was moving forward, she found herself looking back, haunted by the ghosts of their past. In a moment of weakness, she found herself standing outside their old house late one evening, staring at the windows as the lights flickered on in the dark. It was a strange, surreal feeling to be so close to something that had once been home, yet to feel so utterly detached from it. She had lived in that house for years, had raised her children there, had shared so many memories with Ethan. But now, it felt like a prison, a reminder of all that she had lost. She had told herself she was free. She had told herself that leaving him, leaving that life behind, was the right thing to do. But now she wondered, had she made the right choice? Had she really freed herself, or had she simply exchanged one form of captivity for another? The weight of these thoughts was becoming unbearable. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the freedom she had fought so hard for came with a price. The price of independence was loneliness. The price of escaping a toxic marriage was the destruction of everything she had known. The price of freedom was uncertainty, an uncertain future, an uncertain life. And it wasn't just the emotional toll. The financial struggles were mounting. Sofia had no idea how she would make ends meet in the long term. The savings she had were tied up in accounts that Ethan controlled, and getting access to them was proving to be more complicated than she had anticipated. The bills were piling up, and despite Laura's offer to help, Sofia couldn't bring herself to ask for more. She was a mother, a woman who had always prided herself on her independence, and now, that independence felt like a distant memory. Ethan had made sure of it. He had planned everything with such precision that, even in their separation, he held the upper hand. His wealth, his influence, his ability to manipulate the system, they were all working against her. Sofia had thought that by leaving him, she was taking control of her destiny. But the reality was that she had stepped into a world where everything was designed to keep her from succeeding. She had gained freedom, yes, but at a steep price. And now, as the days passed and the consequences of her decisions began to sink in, Sofia realized that the real battle was not just against Ethan, it was against herself. She had to rebuild her life from the ground up, and that process was not going to be easy. The pain of betrayal, the guilt of what she had lost, and the fear of the future all weighed heavily on her. But as the sun began to rise, casting a soft glow over Laura's house, Sofia made a decision. She would not let this define her. She had fought for her freedom, and while it had come with its own set of challenges, she would find a way to overcome them. She owed it to herself, and she owed it to her children. The road ahead would not be easy. But Sofia knew one thing for sure. She would fight for her life, for her future, and for the peace that she had so desperately sought. It had been several months since Sofia had walked away from Ethan, and though the initial shock of separation had worn off, she had found herself in a constant state of flux. The early days spent at Laura's house, followed by the long process of adjusting to her new life, had not been easy. But now, standing at the edge of a new chapter, Sofia couldn't help but look back at how far she had come. The children were adjusting to their new routine, though not without difficulty. They missed their father, still asking questions that Sofia wasn't ready to answer. When is Dad coming home? Her youngest son, Noah, had asked just the other day. It had broken her heart. The fact that she could not give them a definitive answer felt like a weight on her chest, but there was nothing she could do to change the reality of their situation. The divorce papers had been filed, and there was no turning back now. Sofia had initially imagined that escaping Ethan's world would mean a swift return to normalcy. But she had learned quickly that normalcy, in the sense she once understood it, no longer existed. The life she had once known, her marriage, her family home, the image of the successful entrepreneur husband, had all been shattered. And as she picked up the pieces, she realized something profound. Her journey hadn't been about escaping Ethan, but about rediscovering herself. It was early one morning when Sofia finally sat down to reflect on her journey. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a golden hue across the living room of Laura's house. Sofia sat on the couch, her legs curled up beneath her, and stared at the family photos displayed around the room. Her gaze lingered on one photo in particular, a picture of her with Ethan, taken years ago during a family vacation, when everything seemed so simple and perfect. The smiling faces in the photo seemed foreign now, as though they were people she no longer recognized. That version of herself, who believed in the fairy tale marriage, who trusted her husband with everything, felt like a different person altogether. Her divorce from Ethan had been finalized. The legal battles, the court hearings, the painstaking negotiations, they were all behind her now. But the emotional scars of her marriage, the betrayals, the manipulations, the lies, they lingered. It wasn't just Ethan who had deceived her. She had deceived herself in many ways too. For years, she had built a life around a version of truth that wasn't real, and now it was her task to rebuild that life from the ground up. Her relationship with her children was still fragile. Noah, her youngest, seemed to be coping the best, though the questions about their father were frequent and persistent. Lily, her eldest, was a different story. She had always been perceptive, wise beyond her years, and now she seemed to be retreating into herself, her youthful optimism replaced with a quiet sadness. Sofia couldn't help but wonder how much of this change had been her fault. Had she done enough to protect them? Had she shielded them from the fallout of the family's unraveling? It was in these quiet moments, when the house was still and the children were off at school, that Sofia confronted her greatest fear: loneliness. She had grown used to the company of others, her friends, her family, but it was the absence of Ethan that was the hardest to face. It wasn't that she wanted him back. She had made peace with the fact that their marriage was irreparable. But the void left by his presence was something she wasn't prepared for. After all, for most of her adult life, she had defined herself by her role as Ethan's wife. He had been her partner, her confidant, the man she had built a life with. Now, in his absence, she was left to redefine who she was, outside of the constraints of that marriage, outside of the narrative she had once lived within. The first step in this process was reclaiming her own identity. Sofia had always been intelligent, resourceful, and capable, but for years, she had suppressed those qualities, allowing Ethan's larger-than-life presence to overshadow her own. She had been content to play the role of the supportive wife, the one who took care of the home, raised the children, and trusted Ethan's decisions without questioning them. Now, with him gone, she had no choice but to confront the parts of herself that she had neglected. She had to rediscover her ambitions, her strengths, and her purpose. Sofia enrolled in a career development program, something she had never considered before. She had a sharp mind for business, but she had always relied on Ethan to navigate the professional world. Now, with no safety net, she found herself making decisions she never would have imagined a year ago. She applied for jobs, attended networking events, and, most importantly, began building a future for herself, one that didn't rely on Ethan's wealth, influence, or connections. But it wasn't just about professional growth. It was personal growth as well. Sofia had always been a loving, kind person, but she had also been naive. She had believed in the idea of love and family without truly understanding the complexities of human relationships. Ethan had taught her many painful lessons about trust, manipulation, and the darkness that could lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly perfect marriages. But those lessons were not in vain. They had shaped her into someone stronger, more self-aware, and more resilient. As she reflected on her journey, Sofia began to understand that the changes she had undergone weren't just about her relationship with Ethan. They were about her relationship with herself. She had spent so many years living for someone else, trying to please Ethan, trying to be the perfect wife, that she had lost sight of her own needs and desires. Now, she was reclaiming that space, slowly but surely, learning to trust herself again. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult week, Sofia sat with her lawyer to discuss the final details of the divorce settlement. Ethan had tried to keep things civil, but there was a coldness to his demeanor that Sofia hadn't anticipated. He was still bitter, still holding onto the remnants of his pride and his power. It was evident that he saw the end of their marriage as a loss, but Sofia saw it as a gain. In the moments when their paths crossed, during legal meetings, phone calls, or rare moments when he visited the children, Sofia maintained a calm exterior. But inside, she was different. She was no longer the woman who had silently endured his secrets. She was the woman who had fought for her freedom and had won. That afternoon, as she signed the final papers, Sofia realized that she had not just left Ethan. She had left the version of herself that had been tethered to him, the woman who had defined herself by her marriage, by her role as his wife. She had grown into someone new, someone who was capable of standing on her own, someone who no longer needed to hide behind the facade of a perfect family. Sofia walked away from the lawyer's office feeling a strange sense of peace. She was no longer afraid of the future. She was no longer afraid of what might come next. The fear that had once plagued her, the fear of being alone, the fear of failure, the fear of losing control, had dissipated. She had weathered the storm and had emerged from it stronger, more self-assured. As she drove home that day, Sofia thought about her children and what kind of example she wanted to set for them. They had seen their mother in her most vulnerable moments, and now they were beginning to see her rise again. It wasn't an easy process. There were still days when she questioned her decisions, still moments when she felt overwhelmed by the enormity of what she had lost. But there were also moments of triumph, moments when she realized that the life she had rebuilt was hers and hers alone. Sofia had learned that freedom wasn't just about escaping the chains of an abusive marriage. It was about finding the courage to build something new, to redefine her life on her own terms. She had gained so much more than she had ever imagined. The pain of her past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. It was merely a chapter in her story, one that had led her to where she was now, a woman who had reclaimed her life and was ready to embrace whatever came next. As she walked through the door of her new home that evening, the children running to greet her, Sofia smiled. She had made it through the hardest part, and while the road ahead was still uncertain, she knew one thing for sure. She was not the woman she had once been. She had changed. And for the first time in a long time, she was at peace with that.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.